I never thought my backyard propane tank would become the center of a legal battle that would consume 6 months of my life. But that was before I met Patricia Hendricks, the president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association in Gilbert, Arizona. The first time it happened, I thought I was losing my mind. It was a Saturday morning in late March, and I had just gotten back from my morning run. The Arizona sun was already heating up, promising another beautiful spring day. I walked around to my backyard to check on my grill, planning to host a barbecue that evening for some friends from work. That was when I noticed something was off. My propane tank, a full 100-pound tank that I had just filled 3 days earlier at the local supply store, was completely gone. I stood there in my backyard, staring at the empty space where the tank should have been, trying to figure out what had happened. The connection hose was still there, neatly coiled on the ground like someone had carefully disconnected it. My grill sat there looking incomplete and useless without its fuel source. I walked around my yard, checking behind bushes and near my fence, thinking maybe I had moved it for some reason and forgotten. But no, it was definitely gone. My name is Nathan Turner, and I had moved into Willowbrook Estates about 8 months prior. It was a nice community in Gilbert, one of those newer developments with strict rules about lawn maintenance and house colors. I had read through the HOA bylaws before purchasing my 3-bedroom ranch-style home, and while some rules seemed excessive, nothing had prepared me for what was about to unfold. I called my neighbor, Mike, who lived 2 houses down. He came over and confirmed that, yes, there had definitely been a propane tank there earlier in the week because he had noticed it when he was walking his dog past my house. We spent about 20 minutes trying to figure out what might have happened. Mike suggested maybe it had been stolen, which seemed odd because who steals propane tanks in broad daylight from a fenced backyard? That was when Mike mentioned something that made my stomach drop. He told me that Patricia from the HOA had been walking around the neighborhood more than usual lately, doing what she called compliance checks. She had apparently given him a warning about his mailbox being the wrong shade of black just 2 days ago. I decided to check my mailbox, and sure enough, there was a notice from the HOA dated that very morning. It was printed on official Willowbrook Estates letterhead and signed by Patricia Hendricks. The notice stated that I was in violation of Section 12.7 of the HOA bylaws, which prohibited the storage of industrial equipment and hazardous materials in visible areas of the property. It went on to say that my propane tank had been removed for safety reasons and could be retrieved from the HOA storage facility after I paid a fine of $300 and submitted a proper storage plan. I read the notice 3 times, my anger building with each reading. Industrial equipment. It was a standard propane tank for a residential grill. Half the houses in the neighborhood had similar setups, and she had just taken it. Without even giving me a chance to address whatever imaginary violation she thought existed, I immediately called the number listed on the notice. A woman answered on the 3rd ring with a clipped, businesslike tone. Willowbrook Estates, HOA, Patricia speaking. "This is Nathan Turner from 512 Mesquite Drive," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I just found a notice saying you removed my propane tank from my property." "Yes, Mr. Turner. As stated in the notice, you were in violation of the bylaws. The tank was removed this morning at approximately 7:30. You came onto my property and took my propane tank without even talking to me first. The bylaws grant the HOA authority to address safety violations immediately. Your tank was visible from the street and posed a potential hazard. It was in my backyard, behind a 6-foot fence. How is that visible from the street?" There was a pause. I conducted a compliance inspection from the greenway easement that runs behind your property. The tank was clearly visible and in violation. If you would like to discuss this further, I am available during office hours on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the community center. I want my propane tank back, today. As stated in the notice, you will need to pay the removal and storage fee as well as submit a compliant storage plan. The total fee is $300. $300. That is insane. I am not paying you to return something you had no right to take in the first place. Then I am afraid your property will remain in storage. Have a good day, Mr. Turner. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, holding my phone and trying to process what had just happened. This woman had trespassed on my property, stolen my propane tank, and was now holding it hostage for $300. I called my real estate attorney, David Chen, who I had worked with during the home purchase. He listened to my story and asked me to send him photos of the notice and a copy of my HOA bylaws. 2 days later, David called me back. Nathan, I have reviewed your HOA documents and the notice. I have good news and bad news. The good news is that Patricia Hendricks absolutely overstepped her authority. The HOA bylaws do prohibit storage of hazardous materials, but propane tanks for residential use are specifically exempted in Section 12.9. She either did not read her own bylaws carefully, or she is deliberately misinterpreting them. And the bad news is that fighting this through the HOA dispute resolution process could take months. You would need to file a formal complaint, wait for a board hearing, and even then, Patricia has significant influence over the board. Most of them are her friends or people she appointed to committees. My advice: pay the $300, get your tank back, and then file a formal complaint with documentation. Build a paper trail in case this happens again. I did not like it, but David's advice made sense. I was not going to let this go, but I needed my propane tank back first. I wrote a check for $300, drove to the community center on Tuesday afternoon, and waited in the small office that served as HOA headquarters. Patricia Hendricks was exactly what I had imagined. She was a woman in her mid-50s with perfectly styled blonde hair that had that overly processed look, wearing a cream-colored blazer over a floral blouse. She had the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes, and she moved with the confidence of someone who was used to being in charge and never questioned. "Mr. Turner," she said, taking my check and examining it as if I might have tried to short her. "I trust you have prepared a storage plan for your propane tank as required." I handed her a single sheet of paper that David had helped me draft. It stated that I would store my propane tank behind my house, properly secured and maintained according to manufacturer specifications and all applicable fire codes. It was deliberately simple because, according to David, the bylaws did not actually require any storage plan at all. Patricia read it with pursed lips. "This is rather sparse. I was expecting more detail about the specific location, security measures, and maintenance schedule." "The bylaws do not require those details. This meets all actual requirements." She looked up at me with that cold smile. "Mr. Turner, I have been president of this HOA for 6 years. I think I know what our bylaws require." "Then you know that Section 12.9 specifically exempts residential propane tanks from the hazardous materials prohibition. My tank was never in violation." Her smile faltered for just a moment. "I interpret the bylaws based on the overall spirit of community safety and aesthetics. Your tank was an eyesore. It was behind my fence, not visible from any public area except the easement, which you apparently used to spy on my backyard." I was conducting routine compliance checks, which is well within my authority. Now, if you would like your tank back, I suggest you maintain a civil tone. I bit back several responses that would have felt satisfying but would not have helped the situation. Where is my tank? She pulled a key from her desk drawer and stood up. Follow me. We walked to a storage shed behind the community center. Patricia unlocked it and pointed to my propane tank, sitting among lawn equipment and holiday decorations. I inspected it carefully and noticed that the valve had been left partially open. About a third of the propane had leaked out, filling the shed with the distinctive smell. You left the valve open, I said. Do you realize how dangerous that is? Patricia shrugged. That is how I found it. That is absolutely not true. The valve was closed when you took it. You must have opened it when you disconnected it. Are you calling me a liar, Mr. Turner? I looked at her, standing there in her blazer with her arms crossed, and realized that arguing was pointless. I loaded the tank into my truck, got her signature on a receipt, and drove home. I had paid $300 for a tank that was now 2/3 empty, which meant I was out another $60 to refill it. That evening, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, detailing what had happened and requesting reimbursement for the illegal fine and the cost of the lost propane. David helped me draft it to make sure I covered all the necessary points and cited the correct sections of the bylaws. 3 weeks later, I received a response. The board had reviewed my complaint and determined that Patricia's actions were within her authority as president. They denied my request for reimbursement. The letter was signed by all 5 board members: Patricia Hendricks, Donald Morrison, Susan Palmer, Gregory Woods, and Jennifer Carlson. I was frustrated but not surprised. David had warned me this would likely be the outcome. He advised me to document everything and be prepared in case Patricia tried anything else. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 months later, in early June, it happened again. I came home from work on a Wednesday evening and my propane tank was gone. Again. This time there was no notice in my mailbox. Nothing. I immediately took photos of the empty space where the tank had been and called Patricia's office number. It went to voicemail. I drove to the community center, but it was closed. I called David, who was as baffled as I was. This is bizarre. She cannot possibly think she can just keep taking your property. File a police report tonight. Do not wait. I drove to the Gilbert Police Department and filed a theft report. The officer who took my statement, Officer Rodriguez, was sympathetic, but explained that HOA disputes often fell into a gray area. However, since this was the second time and there was no notice or justification, he agreed to classify it as theft. He said an officer would follow up with Patricia within the next few days. The next morning, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. It was Patricia, and she sounded angry. Mr. Turner, I have just been contacted by the police about your false theft report. I am appalled that you would waste police resources over an HOA matter. Where is my propane tank? Your tank was again in violation. This time, you failed to submit your monthly maintenance log as required by the storage plan. There is no requirement for a monthly maintenance log. That is not in the bylaws, and it was not in the storage plan I submitted. It was implied in the safety requirements. You cannot just make up rules. Where is my tank? It is in storage. The retrieval fee this time is $500, given that this is a repeat violation. I am not paying you a dime. You stole my property, and the police are investigating. If you do not return it immediately, I will pursue criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. I look forward to seeing you try, Mr. Turner. This neighborhood has standards, and I will not allow entitled homeowners like you to bring down our property values with your clutter and hazards." She hung up. I immediately called David and Officer Rodriguez to inform them of the conversation. Officer Rodriguez said he would escalate the matter and have a detective follow up. David advised me to send Patricia a formal demand letter via certified mail, which we did that afternoon. The demand letter required Patricia to return my propane tank within 72 hours or face legal action. We sent copies to all 5 HOA board members and to the community management company that administered some of the HOA's functions. The letter made it clear that Patricia's actions were not authorized by the bylaws and constituted theft. Instead of returning my tank, Patricia called an emergency HOA board meeting. I received notice of it the day before it was scheduled, which did not give me much time to prepare. The meeting was held at the community center on a Saturday morning. About 15 residents showed up, most of them probably curious about the drama. Patricia opened the meeting by addressing what she called a situation with a non-compliant resident who has been harassing the board and making false accusations. She painted a picture of me as a troublemaker who refused to follow simple rules and was now trying to intimidate the HOA with legal threats. When it was my turn to speak, I calmly laid out the facts. I explained that I had a standard propane tank for my grill, just like dozens of other homes in the neighborhood. I showed copies of the bylaws with the relevant sections highlighted, demonstrating that Patricia had misinterpreted or ignored the rules. I explained that she had now taken my property twice without proper justification and was demanding hundreds of dollars to return it. Several residents spoke up in my favor. Mike, my neighbor, talked about his own experiences with Patricia's overreach. A woman named Carol mentioned that Patricia had threatened to fine her for having the wrong color flowers in her garden. Another man, James, said Patricia had tried to ban his son's basketball hoop, claiming it was an unauthorized structure, but Patricia had her supporters too. Donald Morrison, the vice president, defended her actions as necessary to maintain community standards. Susan Palmer claimed that property values would plummet if people were allowed to do whatever they wanted. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours and accomplished nothing. The board voted 3-2 to uphold Patricia's authority to remove my tank. Only Gregory Woods and Jennifer Carlson voted against it, and both of them looked uncomfortable during the entire meeting. After the meeting, Gregory approached me in the parking lot. He was a retired accountant in his 60s, and he looked genuinely troubled. "Nathan, I want you to know that I think Patricia is way out of line. Jennifer and I have been trying to rein her in for months, but she has Donald and Susan wrapped around her finger. This is not the first time she has pulled something like this." "What do you mean?" "Last year, she had a resident's car towed because she said it was an unapproved color. It was dark blue, and the bylaws allow any neutral color. She claimed it was not neutral enough. The resident ended up moving out rather than fight her. Before that, she tried to force a family to remove a wheelchair ramp because she said it was not aesthetically consistent with the neighborhood. That is insane. How is she still president? Most people are afraid of her. She files complaints. She threatens fines. She makes people's lives miserable until they either comply or leave. Jennifer and I have discussed trying to call for a vote to remove her, but we do not have enough support on the board. We would need all 5 members to agree to put it to a community vote, or we would need a petition signed by 40% of the homeowners. That is 62 signatures out of 155 homes. I might be able to get those signatures, I said. Gregory shook his head. Patricia will retaliate. Against you and against anyone who signs. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it. I had already filed a police report and sent a demand letter. I was already on her radar. I do not see that I have much choice at this point. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked on a petition to remove Patricia Hendricks as HOA president and call for a special election. David helped me draft it to ensure it met all the legal requirements. I started with my immediate neighbors and worked my way through the community. It was slow going. Many people were sympathetic, but afraid to sign. Some told me stories about Patricia's vindictive behavior, but refused to put their names on anything. During this time, I still did not have my propane tank back. I had bought a new one, but it felt wrong to let Patricia get away with stealing my property. Officer Rodriguez called to tell me that a detective had contacted Patricia, but she had provided receipts and documentation claiming that the HOA had a legitimate right to remove property that violated bylaws. The detective said it was looking more like a civil matter than a criminal one, which was frustrating but not unexpected. Then, in late June, I finally caught a break. Jennifer Carlson called me. She asked to meet at a coffee shop outside the neighborhood. When I arrived, she looked nervous, constantly glancing around as if afraid someone might see her. "Nathan, I need to tell you something, but you cannot reveal where you got this information until it is absolutely necessary," she said. "Patricia does not just have your propane tank. She has been taking items from residents' properties for months, maybe longer. She stores them in her own garage, not in the HOA storage shed." "How do you know this?" "My daughter does lawn care work in the neighborhood. She was working on Patricia's yard last week, and Patricia left her garage door open. My daughter saw your propane tank in there, along with a bunch of other stuff. Outdoor furniture, planters, garden decorations, a fire pit. Things that Patricia has claimed were HOA violations. She is not storing them for the HOA. She is hoarding them. Can your daughter testify to this?" "Not without losing her landscaping contracts. Patricia would make sure of that. But if you could get inside that garage or get the police to search it, you would find your proof." I thanked Jennifer and immediately called David. He was intrigued but cautioned that we needed to be careful. We could not just break into Patricia's garage, and getting a search warrant would require more evidence than a second-hand account from a landscaper. "What if we catch her in the act?" I suggested. "If I can prove she has my property, the police would have to act." David thought about it. "It is risky, but if you could document that your property is on her premises without trespassing yourself, that might give us enough for the police to investigate. But do not do anything illegal." I spent the next few days planning. Patricia lived in a house on the opposite end of Willowbrook Estates, a large corner lot with minimal landscaping and a 3-car garage. I drove past her house several times, trying to figure out how I could see into her garage without trespassing. The opportunity came during the 4th of July weekend. The HOA had organized a community barbecue at the neighborhood park. I knew Patricia would be there, playing hostess and probably scouting for more violations. I asked Mike if he would be willing to help me, and after hearing the full story, he agreed. While Patricia was at the barbecue, Mike and I drove to her house. I parked down the street and we walked up carefully. Her front yard had no fence, and her garage had small windows on the side. Technically, we were not trespassing because we stayed on the public sidewalk. I used my phone to take photos through the garage windows. The pictures were dark and grainy, but they clearly showed a propane tank that looked exactly like mine. I could even see the green paint mark I had made on the top to identify it. There were also several other items that did not belong in a typical garage. Expensive-looking outdoor furniture, decorative garden items, and what appeared to be a small water fountain. I sent the photos to Officer Rodriguez immediately, along with an explanation of how I had obtained them. He called me back within an hour. Mr. Turner, these photos are interesting, but they are not conclusive. I cannot get a search warrant based on this alone. However, I can go to her house and ask to speak with her about the investigation. If she gives permission for me to look around, that would be different. She is not going to give permission. You would be surprised. A lot of people get nervous when police show up and try to appear cooperative. Let me try. The next day was July 5th, a Sunday. Officer Rodriguez and another officer went to Patricia's house in the evening. I was not there, but Officer Rodriguez called me later to tell me what happened. Patricia had been defensive at first, claiming the investigation was harassment. But when Officer Rodriguez mentioned that he had received information about items being stored in her garage, she made a mistake. She said, "You cannot search my garage without a warrant," which made her look like she had something to hide. Officer Rodriguez had asked, "Why would I need a warrant if you have nothing to hide? I am just trying to clear this up. If you can show me that Mr. Turner's property is not in your garage, this whole thing goes away." Patricia had hesitated, then insisted that she needed to speak with her lawyer first. Officer Rodriguez had told her that was her right, but the investigation would continue. He also mentioned that refusing to cooperate could lead to more serious inquiries. 2 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Patricia, and her tone was completely different from our previous conversations. She sounded tired and defeated. "Mr. Turner, I have your propane tank. You can come pick it up this evening." Just like that. No fee, no storage plan required. Just come get it. I will leave it at the end of my driveway. You do not need to knock or speak with me. I was suspicious, but agreed. When I drove to her house that evening, my propane tank was indeed sitting at the end of her driveway, along with a patio chair that did not belong to me. I loaded my tank into my truck, took photos of everything for documentation, and called Officer Rodriguez to let him know. I thought that would be the end of it. I had my tank back, and Patricia clearly wanted to avoid further police involvement. I figured she would leave me alone now. I stopped working on the petition to remove her, deciding it was not worth the continued drama. Life in Willowbrook Estates returned to normal. I used my grill, maintained my lawn according to HOA standards, and avoided any interaction with Patricia. 3 months passed. Summer turned to fall, and Arizona's brutal heat gave way to perfect outdoor weather. I had almost forgotten about the entire propane saga. Then, in early October, it happened a third time. I came home from work on a Tuesday, and my propane tank was gone again. But this time was different. My entire outdoor grill setup had been disassembled. The grill itself had been moved to the far corner of my yard. The connecting hose had been cut, and there was trash scattered across my patio. Empty plastic bottles, food wrappers, and other garbage that was definitely not mine. I stood in my backyard, staring at the mess and feeling a white-hot anger rise in my chest. This was not just about a propane tank anymore. This was vandalism and harassment. I took extensive photos and videos, documenting everything from multiple angles. Then I called the police. This time, a different officer responded. Officer Amanda Chen arrived within 20 minutes and listened to my entire story, including the previous 2 incidents. She took her own photos and notes, and her expression grew more serious as I explained the pattern of behavior. "Mr. Turner, this appears to be criminal harassment, theft, and possibly vandalism. I am going to file a comprehensive report and recommend that a detective take over this case. You still have documentation from the previous incidents. I have everything. Police reports, demand letters, photos, HOA meeting minutes, all of it. Good. I am also going to request that an officer make contact with Miss Hendricks tonight. This has gone on long enough." Officer Chen was true to her word. That evening, 2 officers went to Patricia's house. I later learned from Gregory, who had somehow heard about it through the neighborhood gossip network, that Patricia had been confronted and had initially denied any involvement. But when the officers mentioned that they would be pursuing criminal charges and would obtain a search warrant if necessary, Patricia had broken down. She admitted to taking my propane tank all 3 times. She claimed that she was trying to enforce HOA standards and that I was being difficult and non-compliant. The officers had explained that HOA enforcement did not give her the right to steal property or vandalize someone's yard. They gave her 2 options: return the propane tank immediately and face potential charges, or refuse and definitely face charges. Patricia returned my propane tank that night. One of the officers escorted her to my house, where she handed over the tank without saying a word to me. She looked terrible, her hair disheveled and her eyes red. The officer confirmed that my tank was intact and asked if I wanted to press charges. Yes, I said without hesitation. This is the 3rd time. She needs to face consequences. The officer nodded. A detective will contact you tomorrow to discuss next steps. Detective Marcus Wilson called me the following afternoon. He was with the Gilbert Police Department's Property Crimes Division and had been assigned to my case. He asked me to come to the station to give a formal statement and bring all my documentation. I spent 2 hours at the police station, going through everything with Detective Wilson. He was thorough and professional, asking detailed questions about each incident. He was particularly interested in the photos I had taken of Patricia's garage and the circumstances around how she had returned my tank the 2nd time. Mr. Turner, based on what you have told me and the evidence you have provided, I believe we have grounds to charge Ms. Hendricks with multiple counts of theft and 1 count of criminal damage. However, I want to conduct a more thorough investigation first. I am going to interview the other HOA board members and some of your neighbors. I may also seek a search warrant for her property if I can establish enough probable cause. What about the items that Jennifer said were in her garage? Other people's property? That is part of what I am investigating. If Miss Hendricks has a pattern of taking residents' property under false pretenses, that strengthens the case significantly. Over the next 3 weeks, Detective Wilson conducted his investigation. He interviewed Gregory and Jennifer, who both confirmed that Patricia had a history of aggressive HOA enforcement that often crossed legal lines. He spoke with Mike and Carol and several other residents who had experienced similar issues with Patricia. He also obtained HOA financial records and discovered that Patricia had been charging removal and storage fees to at least 8 different residents over the past 2 years, totaling more than $4,000. None of that money had been deposited into the HOA's accounts. Armed with this information, Detective Wilson obtained a search warrant for Patricia's home. The search was conducted on a Thursday morning in late October. I was not there, but Detective Wilson called me later that day to fill me in. Mr. Turner, we executed the search warrant this morning. You were right. Patricia Hendricks had a garage full of items taken from residents' properties. We documented and photographed everything. We also found records showing that she has been pocketing the fees she charged people to return their property. This is no longer just about your propane tank. This is organized theft and fraud. What happens now? I am submitting my report to the county attorney's office with a recommendation for multiple criminal charges. Given the amount of money involved and the number of victims, I expect they will pursue this aggressively. You will probably be contacted by a prosecutor in the next week or 2. I felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. This had consumed so much of my time and energy over the past 7 months. But finally, it looked like Patricia was going to face real consequences. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office contacted me in early November. A prosecutor named Sarah Mitchell was assigned to the case. She explained that they were charging Patricia Hendricks with 7 counts of theft, 1 count of criminal damage, and 3 counts of fraud. The theft charges covered my propane tank incidents, plus property taken from 4 other residents. The criminal damage charge was for vandalizing my patio. The fraud charges related to the fees she had collected under false pretenses. "Mr. Turner, I want to be upfront with you about what to expect," Sarah said during our phone conversation. "This is a strong case, but it is also complicated because of the HOA angle. Patricia's defense attorney will likely argue that she believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president. We will need to prove that she knew she was breaking the law and was motivated by personal gain rather than legitimate HOA enforcement. I have documentation showing that she was told repeatedly that her actions were illegal. I sent demand letters. My attorney cited the exact bylaws she was violating, and the police spoke with her multiple times. That will help. I am also going to call your HOA attorney and several of your neighbors as witnesses. This will probably go to trial unless Patricia accepts a plea deal." The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings. Patricia was formally arraigned in late November. She pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her attorney, a sharp-looking man named Robert Danson, argued that this was a gross overreaction to what were essentially civil HOA disputes. He claimed that Patricia had been acting in good faith to maintain community standards and had charged fees to cover the HOA's expenses. The prosecution responded by presenting evidence that the fees Patricia charged were never deposited into HOA accounts, that she had kept stolen property in her personal garage rather than HOA storage, and that she had continued taking property even after being told by police and attorneys that her actions were illegal. The case was scheduled for trial in February. In January, Sarah Mitchell called to tell me that Patricia's attorney had approached her about a possible plea deal. Patricia was willing to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for probation and restitution. "What do you think?" I asked. "Should I agree to this?" "That is ultimately up to you. If we go to trial, there is a chance we could get a harsher sentence, including potential jail time. But trials are unpredictable. With a plea deal, we guarantee that Patricia faces consequences and that you and the other victims get restitution. My recommendation would be to accept it, as long as the terms are fair." The plea deal was finalized in mid-February. Patricia Hendricks pleaded guilty to 3 counts of theft and 1 count of fraud. The other charges were dismissed. In exchange, she was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered to pay full restitution to all victims. The restitution hearing was held in early March, almost exactly 1 year after the first incident with my propane tank. I sat in the courtroom along with 4 other Willowbrook Estates residents who had been victims of Patricia's scheme. The judge, Judge Elizabeth Kwan, presided over the hearing with a stern efficiency. Judge Kwan reviewed the evidence of each theft and calculated the restitution amounts. For me, she awarded the full $600 I had paid in fees for the first 2 incidents, plus $120 for the propane that had been wasted or lost, plus $300 for the damaged grill hose and the cost of cleaning up the vandalism. The total restitution order for all victims came to just over $5,000. Before issuing her final ruling, Judge Kwan addressed Patricia directly. "Miss Hendricks, you held a position of trust in your community. Residents relied on you to enforce rules fairly and legally. Instead, you abused that trust for personal gain. You stole from your neighbors, lied to them, and created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. Your behavior was not just illegal, it was a betrayal of the most fundamental principles of community living. Patricia stood with her head down, saying nothing. She looked like a shell of the confident, controlling woman I had first met in the HOA office. Judge Kwan continued, "I am sentencing you to 3 years of supervised probation. During that time, you will complete 100 hours of community service, pay full restitution to your victims, and you are prohibited from serving in any leadership capacity in any homeowners association. You will also undergo counseling to address the underlying issues that led to this behavior. If you violate any terms of your probation, you will face the maximum jail sentence for the charges you pleaded guilty to. You understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said quietly. The hearing ended and I walked out of the courthouse with a sense of closure. It was not perfect. I had spent a year dealing with this mess, countless hours of stress and frustration, and money on legal fees that restitution would not cover. But Patricia had been held accountable, and that mattered. The aftermath in Willowbrook Estates was significant. Patricia resigned from the HOA immediately after the sentencing. The board called for a special election, and Gregory Woods was elected as the new president. Jennifer Carlson became vice president. They immediately set about reforming the HOA's enforcement procedures, creating clear guidelines and checks on authority to prevent anyone from abusing power the way Patricia had. I received my first restitution check in April, about a month after the sentencing. It was not the full amount, as Patricia was on a payment plan, but it was a start. Over the next 6 months, I received the remainder of what I was owed. Life in the neighborhood improved dramatically under Gregory's leadership. The HOA became less about nitpicking and more about actually maintaining the community. Flowers could be whatever color residents wanted. Basketball hoops were allowed. Propane tanks for grills were explicitly confirmed as permitted under the bylaws, with a note that this had always been the case. I ran into Patricia once, about 8 months after the trial. She was doing community service, picking up trash along one of the neighborhood's walking paths. We made eye contact for a brief moment. She looked away quickly and I kept walking. There was nothing to say. She had learned her lesson, or at least I hope she had. As for me, I learned a lot about standing up for yourself and not backing down when you know you are right. It would have been easier to just pay Patricia's fees and accept her authority, but that would have meant letting her continue to abuse other residents. By fighting back, documenting everything, and pursuing justice through proper legal channels, I had not just solved my own problem, but had helped fix a systemic issue in my community. My propane tank still sits behind my house, properly maintained and never moved by anyone but me. Every time I fire up my grill, I think about the absurd journey that tank took me on. Stolen twice, used as leverage for illegal fees, and ultimately the catalyst for bringing down a petty tyrant who had terrorized a neighborhood for years. The whole experience taught me that HOA boards are only as good as the people serving on them, and that communities need residents willing to stand up against abuse of power. It also taught me that patience, documentation, and following proper legal procedures really do work, even when the process is frustrating and slow. Gregory Woods turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He created a suggestion box for residents and held quarterly community meetings where anyone could voice concerns. He established a proper appeals process for any HOA enforcement actions, requiring at least 3 board members to approve anything before action could be taken. He also hired a professional community management firm to handle day-to-day operations, removing the potential for any one person to have too much control. The entire board was more transparent about finances, publishing quarterly reports showing exactly how HOA fees were being spent. They discovered that Patricia had also been overcharging for various community maintenance items and pocketing the difference, though those amounts were too small to prosecute separately. The board used the savings from eliminating that corruption to finally repave some of the neighborhood streets that had needed work for years. One unexpected positive outcome was that the residents of Willowbrook Estates became much more engaged with the HOA. Attendance at board meetings increased dramatically. People who had previously been too intimidated to speak up now felt comfortable voicing opinions and concerns. The community became more of an actual community, rather than a collection of people living in fear of their HOA president. I also became more involved, serving on the compliance committee to help review any potential violations before enforcement action was taken. It was voluntary, and I probably spent more time on it than I should have, but I wanted to make sure that what happened to me never happened to anyone else in Willowbrook Estates. The legal system had worked the way it was supposed to, even if it took longer than I would have liked. Patricia faced consequences appropriate to her crimes, probation rather than jail time, but with real penalties and restrictions that would affect her life for years. The restitution ensured that her victims were compensated for their losses. And the permanent ban on serving in HOA leadership meant she could not simply move to another community and repeat her behavior. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia ended up selling her house and moving out of Willowbrook Estates about a year after the trial. I could not blame her. Living in a community where everyone knew what she had done must have been unbearable. I hoped she had learned from the experience and would treat her new neighbors with more respect, but that was not my concern anymore. My life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after becoming the guy who took down the HOA president. I still got recognized occasionally at neighborhood events, with people thanking me for standing up to Patricia, or sharing their own stories of her harassment. Each conversation reinforced that I had done the right thing by not backing down. The propane tank that had started it all eventually needed to be replaced, not because anyone stole it, but because it reached the end of its useful life. When I bought a new one, I made sure to take a photo of it in place behind my house, properly secured and in full compliance with all applicable bylaws. I sent the photo to Gregory as a joke, with a note saying, "New tank, just wanted to confirm it meets all requirements." He responded with a laughing emoji and a message, "Looks perfect, grill away." Looking back on the entire experience, from that first morning when I discovered my propane tank missing to the final restitution check arriving in the mail, I realized that it had been about more than just stolen property or HOA overreach. It had been about the importance of community, the rule of law, and the responsibility we all have to stand up against injustice, even when it would be easier to just go along. Patricia Hendricks probably never understood the real harm she caused. It was not just the monetary value of the items she stole or the fees she charged. It was the stress she inflicted on families, the fear she created in a place where people should have felt safe and comfortable, and the erosion of trust that occurred when someone in authority abused their power. Rebuilding that trust took time and effort from many people, but it was worth it. The final chapter of the story came about 18 months after the trial. I received a letter from the Maricopa County Probation Department informing me that Patricia Hendricks had successfully completed her probation requirements. She had paid all restitution in full, completed her community service hours, and attended all required counseling sessions. Her probation was being terminated early due to her compliance. I felt no particular emotion reading the letter. Not satisfaction, not anger, just a sense that a chapter had closed. Patricia had served her sentence, and now she could move on with her life. I hoped she was a better person for the experience, but I would probably never know. That same week, the Willowbrook Estates HOA held its annual meeting. Gregory Woods announced that he would be stepping down as president after 3 years in the role. He felt the community was back on track and wanted to give someone else the opportunity to lead. The election was held, and a woman named Rachel Martinez was elected as the new president. She had been active in the community for years and had a reputation for being fair and reasonable. During that meeting, Rachel publicly thanked me for my role in reforming the HOA. Nathan Turner showed us all what it means to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult and inconvenient. Because of his courage, our community is better, stronger, and more just. I promise to continue the good work that Gregory started and to never forget the lessons we learned from that difficult time. The room erupted in applause, and I felt genuinely moved. I had not set out to be a hero or a community leader. I had just wanted my propane tank back. But sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone, and that is worth the effort. As I sat there in the community center, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, I thought about how much had changed in the 2.5 years since I had first moved to Willowbrook Estates. I had learned about HOA law, criminal procedure, and the importance of documentation. I had learned that most people want to do the right thing, but sometimes need someone to show them how. And I had learned that a simple propane tank could become a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny. The meeting concluded with refreshments and socializing. Several people came up to share their own updates and stories. Mike told me his mailbox, the one Patricia had cited as being the wrong shade of black, was still exactly the same color and would stay that way as long as he lived there. Carol showed me photos of her garden, now featuring every color of flower imaginable. James's son's basketball hoop was still standing, being used nearly every afternoon by kids from throughout the neighborhood. These small victories, these little assertions of personal freedom within the structure of community living, were what made Willowbrook Estates a good place to live. The HOA still had rules, and those rules were still enforced, but now it was done fairly, transparently, and with respect for residents' rights. I drove home that evening thinking about everything that had happened. From angry phone calls with Patricia to police, reports to court hearings to restitution checks to community recognition, it had been a long and often frustrating journey, but it had been worth it. My neighborhood was better, people were happier, and Patricia Hendricks would never steal anyone's propane tank again. The next weekend, I hosted a barbecue in my backyard. Friends from work came, along with neighbors from Willowbrook Estates. Mike brought his famous potato salad. Carol brought flowers from her garden to use as decorations. James and his family came, and his son spent the afternoon shooting baskets in my driveway with other kids from the neighborhood. I stood at my grill, cooking burgers and hot dogs, my propane tank sitting exactly where it belonged, and I felt genuinely happy. This was what a community was supposed to be. People coming together, supporting each other, and enjoying life without fear of arbitrary rules or petty tyrants. As the sun set over Gilbert, Arizona, casting long shadows across my backyard, I flipped the last burger and called everyone to come eat. The propane tank that had caused so much trouble continued doing its job, fueling my grill and helping me feed my friends and neighbors. It was just a piece of equipment, a simple metal cylinder filled with gas, but it had become something more. A reminder that standing up for what is right matters, that justice can prevail, and that even the smallest things are worth fighting for when the principle is important. The story of HOA Karen who stole my propane twice, and how the judge gave her probation and a restitution order the third time, became a legend in Willowbrook Estates. New residents would hear about it and ask if it was really true. I would confirm that yes, every word of it was true, and then I would direct them to the current HOA board if they had any questions about the rules. The system worked now, the way it was always supposed to work, and my propane tank. It sits behind my house to this day, unmolested and exactly where it belongs.